To our amazing viewers at Cheating Tales Lab, we'd love to hear, which part of the world are you joining us from? Let us know. Now, let's dive into today's story. Chapter 1. The Stop. The taillight had been broken for 3 days. Roland Sweeney kept meaning to fix it, but between the 12-hour shifts at the construction site and Jillian's constant requests for his attention, he'd let it slide. Now, watching the red and blue lights flash in his rearview mirror on this empty stretch of Route 47, he cursed his procrastination. Roland pulled over, hands already on the steering wheel at 10 and 2. The officer approached slowly, flashlight beam cutting through the October darkness. Young guy, maybe 30, with careful eyes that swept the interior of Roland's truck before settling on his face. Evening, sir. License and registration, please. Evening, officer. Roland's voice was steady, calm. 15 years in construction management had taught him to keep his composure under pressure. He reached for the glove compartment, movements deliberate and visible. Taillight, right? I know. I've been meaning to. Yes, sir. The taillight. The officer, Collins, his nameplate read, took the documents with a professional nod. Wait here, please. Roland watched in the side mirror as Officer Collins returned to his patrol car. Standard procedure. Run the plates, check for warrants, write the ticket. 5 minutes, maybe 10. He pulled out his phone, thought about texting Jillian that he'd be late, then decided against it. She'd been strange lately, jumpy. Probably the stress from her new job at the medical office. At least, that's what she'd told him. The minutes stretched. Roland's phone showed 9:47 p.m. Collins had been back there for almost 15 minutes now. Through the mirror, he could see the officer's silhouette, phone pressed to his ear. Then another call. Then another. Something was wrong. When Collins finally emerged from the patrol car, his face had drained of color. The confident stride was gone, replaced by something that looked almost like fear. Or was it pity? He approached Roland's window with one hand resting on his service weapon, a detail that made Roland's pulse quicken. Sir, I need you to step out of the vehicle. What's going on, officer? Roland kept his hands visible, but his mind was already racing. He hadn't had so much as a speeding ticket in 5 years. Please, sir, step out of the vehicle. Now. Collins's voice had an edge to it, urgent but trying to stay professional. You need to come with me to the police station. Roland complied, slow and careful. Why? What's this about? Collins glanced around the empty road, then back at Roland. His jaw worked for a moment, as if deciding how much to say. Finally, he leaned in close, voice dropping to just above a whisper. Sir, when I ran your plates, they flagged in a federal database. There's an active investigation. He paused, swallowing hard. It's about your wife. The words hit Roland like a physical blow. Jillian? What about Jillian? Collins pulled out his phone, fingers trembling slightly as he navigated to something. Look at this. I wasn't supposed to show you, but... He angled the screen toward Roland. It was a law enforcement database entry. Roland's name at the top. But below it, a list of charges that made his blood run cold. Conspiracy to commit fraud, identity theft, suspected involvement in organized criminal activity. And next to his name, flagged as a co-conspirator, Jillian Marie Sweeney. But that wasn't the worst part. The worst part was the photograph beneath Jillian's name. Not the woman he'd married 3 years ago, but someone else entirely. Same face, but different name, Jillian Wolfe, wanted in connection with a multi-state fraud operation. That's not possible, Roland breathed. But even as he said it, pieces began clicking into place. The way Jillian had insisted they get married at the courthouse with no family present. How she discouraged him from social media, from posting photos of them together. The separate bank accounts she'd insisted on. Her vague explanations about her past, her family, her history before they'd met. The detective assigned to the case wants to speak with you immediately, Collins said. Sir, I'm not arresting you. Not yet. But you need to come with me. Because either you're a victim in this, or... He didn't finish the sentence. Roland looked at the phone in his hand. He'd been about to text her, to tell her he'd be late. The woman he'd shared a bed with for 3 years. The woman who'd looked him in the eyes that very morning and said, I love you, before he left for work. The woman who apparently didn't exist. Let's go, Roland said, his voice hollow. As he walked toward the patrol car, one thought crystallized in his mind with perfect clarity. He would never return home again. Not to that house. Not to that life. Not to whatever web of lies Jillian, or whoever she really was, had woven around him. Behind them, Roland's truck sat abandoned on the roadside, taillights still broken, as everything he thought he knew shattered like glass. Chapter 2. The Foundation of Lies. The interrogation room at the county police station was exactly what Roland expected. Fluorescent lights, metal table, uncomfortable chairs, and a two-way mirror that reflected his own haunted expression. Detective Garrett Collins, no relation to the patrol officer, sat across from him, a thick file folder between them like a barrier. "Mr. Sweeney, I need you to understand something," Detective Collins said, his voice gravelly with exhaustion. "You're not under arrest. You're here voluntarily. But what I'm about to show you, it's going to be difficult to process." Roland's hands were steady on the table, but inside, he was fracturing. "Just tell me what's going on." Collins opened the folder. The first photograph made Roland's stomach turn. It was Jillian, his Jillian, but she was with another man, kissing him, laughing with him. The timestamp showed it was from 2 weeks ago, while Roland had been working a double shift. "The man in the photo is Clayton Wolfe," Collins explained. "He's Jillian's, or rather, Jillian Wolfe's, husband. Has been for 7 years." The room tilted. "That's impossible. She's been married to me for 3 years. She's been married to both of you. And to a man named Marcus in Oregon. And another in Texas before that." Collins slid more photos across. "Different men, different houses, but the same woman. She's a ghost bride, Mr. Sweeney. She marries men, builds a life with them, and then she and Clayton systematically destroy them." Roland's mind flashed back 3 years. He'd been at a bar after work, drowning the stress of a failed business partnership that had left him nearly bankrupt. Jillian had been there, beautiful and kind, laughing at his jokes. They'd talked for hours. She'd seemed perfect, too perfect, he'd thought at the time, but he'd been too lonely to question it. "How?" Roland's voice cracked. "How does she? Identity theft, financial fraud, but that's not the worst of it." Collins pulled out another document. "They don't just rob these men. They frame them. They build cases that make their victims look like the criminals. You were next, Mr. Sweeney." The detective laid out the evidence. Over the past 6 months, credit cards had been opened in Roland's name. Loans taken out. A shell company registered with his signature. A signature Jillian must have forged from the dozens of documents he'd signed without reading, trusting his wife. Money had been moved, laundered, and traced back to accounts with his name attached. "But I didn't do any of this." Roland's composure finally cracked. "I know. We've been watching Jillian and Clayton for months. You're not their first victim, but we're hoping you'll be their last." Collins leaned forward. "Here's the thing. They're careful. They've done this 4 times before, and not one of their victims could prove their innocence. 2 of them are in prison right now. 1 committed suicide. The 4th disappeared, probably running from charges he couldn't beat." Roland felt bile rise in his throat. "Why are you telling me this? Why not just arrest them?" "Because they're smart. They always have an exit strategy, and they're about to use it." Collins pulled out his phone, showing Roland a series of text messages. "We've been monitoring their communications. Tomorrow, they're planning to activate the final phase. They're going to call the police, report that you've been threatening Jillian, that they've discovered evidence of your criminal activities. They'll play the terrified spouse, you'll be arrested, and while you're tied up in court, they'll disappear with everything." Tomorrow. Roland's mind was racing now, pulling out of the shock and into something sharper. They're moving tomorrow? According to their communications, yes. Collins studied Roland carefully. "Which is why we need your help. We need to catch them in the act, get evidence that will stick. But it requires you to go back to that house, to act normal, to play the unsuspecting husband for just a little longer." Every instinct in Roland screamed against it. But beneath the betrayal, beneath the hurt, something else was building. Something cold and calculating. He'd spent 15 years managing construction projects, coordinating teams, solving problems. He'd built buildings from the ground up. He could tear this down too. But Collins was bound by the law. Roland was beginning to realize that he wasn't. "What if I have a different idea?" Roland asked slowly. Collins raised an eyebrow. "We need to do this by the book, Mr. Sweeney." "Of course." Roland's face was carefully neutral. "I understand. I'll do whatever you need. I'll wear a wire. I'll get you evidence." He paused. "But I need to know everything. Every victim, every detail. If I'm going to convince Jillian that nothing's wrong, I need to understand the whole operation." Collins hesitated. then seemed to decide Roland deserved the truth. For the next 2 hours, he laid out the entire conspiracy. How Jillian and Clayton had met in prison. She'd been serving time for identity theft, he for fraud. How they perfected their system. How a third conspirator, a woman named Rosemary Proctor, worked at a credit monitoring company and fed them information on potential targets. Men who were vulnerable, lonely, financially stable, but not wealthy enough to have sophisticated protection. Roland absorbed it all, his mind filing away every detail. Names, dates, methods. The detective thought he was preparing to help with a legal takedown. Roland was planning something else entirely. "There's something else you should know," Collins said finally. "We searched your house while you were en route here. We had a warrant. We found evidence that they were planning something more this time. Something permanent." He slid one final photograph across the table. It showed a bottle of pills, a prescription in Roland's name that he'd never gotten, hidden in Jillian's nightstand drawer. "Fentanyl," Collins said quietly. "Enough to kill someone and make it look like an accidental overdose. We think they were planning to kill you, Mr. Sweeney, collect the life insurance, and disappear with the money they've stolen while making you look like a drug-addicted criminal who took his own life." The room fell silent. Roland stared at the photograph, and something inside him crystallized into diamond-hard resolve. They'd tried to erase him, to kill him, to destroy everything he was. Now, he would return the favor. "What do you need me to do?" Roland asked, his voice steady as steel. Chapter 3, Beneath the Surface. Roland left the police station at 2 a.m. with a wire taped to his chest and a script in his head. Detective Collins had been clear. Go home, act normal, gather evidence. Don't let them suspect anything. The law would handle the rest. But as Roland drove through the dark streets toward the house he'd shared with a stranger, he was already discarding that script. The law had failed for other men. 2 were in prison for crimes they didn't commit. 1 was dead. The system was too slow, too careful, too bound by rules that people like Jillian and Clayton had learned to exploit. Roland parked in the driveway at 2:17 a.m. The house was dark except for the porch light Jillian always left on, a touch he'd once found thoughtful. Now it seemed like just another part of the performance. He sat in the truck for a moment, hands on the wheel, breathing steady. Then he reached down and turned off the wire. Collins would be furious, but this conversation needed to happen without an audience. The front door opened before he reached it. Jillian stood there in her nightgown, face creased with false concern. "Roland, oh my God, I was so worried. You didn't answer your phone, I thought." She reached for him, and he let her embrace him, feeling nothing but revulsion. "Taillight," he said, voice carefully weary. "Cop pulled me over, but then there was an accident further up the road. They needed statements from anyone who'd been through the area. Took forever. The lie came easily. 3 years with a professional liar had taught him something." "You poor thing." She cupped his face, and he saw it now. The calculation behind her eyes, the performance of affection. "Come to bed. In a minute. I need a drink first." In the kitchen, Roland poured whiskey with steady hands while his mind raced. He'd spent the drive home thinking, planning. The detective had given him more information than intended, and one name had stuck in his mind: Stanley Kemp. Stanley had been his business partner 5 years ago. The partnership that had failed, that had left Roland broke, that had put him in that bar where Jillian had coincidentally appeared. Except it hadn't been a coincidence at all. According to Collins's file, Rosemary Proctor had flagged Roland as a target 6 months before that partnership collapsed. Which meant, Roland pulled out his phone, fingers moving quickly. Stanley answered on the 3rd ring, voice groggy. "Roland? Man, it's 2 in the morning. "Stanley, I need you to think carefully before you answer this question," Roland interrupted, voice low. 5 years ago, when our partnership fell apart, that deal we were counting on, the one that fell through at the last minute. Do you remember why?" A pause. "Yeah, the investor backed out. Said he'd found irregularities in our paperwork. What if I told you those irregularities were planted?" Another pause, longer this time. "What are you talking about?" "I'm saying we were sabotaged. Someone made sure that deal fell through, made sure I was vulnerable, alone, and desperate. And I need to know if you had anything to do with it." "Jesus, Roland, no? That deal failing nearly destroyed me too." Stanley stopped. "Wait, you think someone deliberately sabotaged us?" "I know they did. I need you to trust me right now and answer something else. After the partnership ended, did anyone approach you?" Offer you a way to make back the money. The silence stretched so long Roland thought the call had dropped. Then, a woman. She said she was a financial consultant, could help me recoup my losses. I told her no, because it sounded too good to be true. Stanley's breathing quickened. Roland, what the hell is going on? I can't explain over the phone, but I need your help. Can you meet me tomorrow, somewhere public? The old construction site, Building 12. We still have the keys from the project. Nobody's there on Sundays. Noon. Come alone, and Stanley, don't trust anyone until we talk. Not anyone. Roland ended the call and turned to find Jillian standing in the doorway. His heart rate didn't spike. Years of managing crisis situations on construction sites had taught him to keep his reactions internal. Who was that? She asked, voice light but eyes sharp. Stanley Kemp. You remember me mentioning him? Old business partner. Roland took a sip of whiskey. His kid's birthday is coming up. I was just confirming I'd send a gift. Jillian's expression didn't change, but something flickered in her eyes. That's sweet of you. Come to bed, honey. He followed her upstairs, his mind cataloging everything he'd missed over 3 years. The way she'd discouraged him from reconnecting with old friends. How she'd always steered him away from certain conversations. The times she'd disappeared for hours with explanations that seemed reasonable at the time, but now rang hollow. As Jillian fell asleep beside him, or pretended to, Roland stared at the ceiling and pieced together his plan. Collins wanted evidence for an arrest. But arrests could be beaten. Trials could be lost. Roland had learned that from the detective's files. No, Roland needed something more permanent. Something that would destroy Jillian and Clayton the way they destroyed others. He needed to dismantle their entire operation, expose them to everyone they'd ever conned, and make sure they could never do this again. But more than that, and this was the thought that settled over him like cold clarity, he needed them to understand what it felt like to be erased. Around 4 a.m., Jillian's phone buzzed on the nightstand. Roland watched through slitted eyes as she checked it, face illuminated by the screen. She typed a quick response, then set the phone down. But she'd been careless. The screen was still on, brightness low but readable. The message preview was visible. Clayton, is he suspicious? We need to move the timeline up. Can you? The screen went dark before Roland could read the rest, but it was enough. They were spooked. Maybe they'd heard about the police monitoring, or maybe they were just paranoid. Either way, Roland's window was closing faster than he'd thought. He waited until Jillian's breathing evened out again, then carefully slipped from the bed. In his home office, another place he'd been subtly discouraged from spending time, he booted up his computer and began to dig. He'd been a fool, trusting Jillian with passwords, with access to his accounts. But he wasn't just a construction manager. Before that, he'd been in the Army, combat engineer, and he'd learned a thing or two about demolition. Sometimes, you had to destroy the foundation to bring the whole structure down. By sunrise, Roland had found them. Hidden folders on the computer's hard drive, encrypted but not encrypted enough. Jillian had gotten lazy, comfortable. Inside were the records of everything. The other victims, the money laundering routes, the forged documents. And more importantly, communications with Rosemary Proctor and Clayton Wolfe, including a video file dated 2 weeks ago. Roland clicked it, and his blood turned to ice. It showed Jillian and Clayton in a cheap motel room, laughing as they reviewed their plan. Clayton raised a bottle, the fentanyl, and said, "To the last job. After this, we're set for life." Jillian clinked her glass against his. He'll never see it coming. They never do. The video ended with them in bed together, and Roland closed the laptop carefully, his jaw clenched. He heard Jillian stirring in the bedroom, preparing for another day of playing house with the man she planned to murder. Roland checked the time, 6:47 a.m. He had decisions to make. The wire detective Collins had given him was still turned off. The evidence on this computer would be enough to convict them all. He could call Collins right now, and this the legal way. But the legal way had failed too many others. And as Roland sat there, thinking of the 4 men whose lives had been destroyed, of the 2 in prison, of the one who'd taken his own life, he realized something. He didn't want justice. He wanted revenge. And he was going to make sure that when this was over, Jillian, Clayton, and everyone who'd helped them would wish they'd never heard his name. Chapter 4. The Gathering Storm. Sunday morning arrived with unseasonable cold. Roland went through the motions of a normal day. Coffee, newspaper, small talk with Jillian about dinner plans. while his mind worked through the calculations. At 11:30, he told her he was going to the hardware store for supplies. She barely looked up from her phone, where she was presumably coordinating with Clayton. The old construction site was a skeleton of rust and concrete, a failed development that had died during the recession. Building 12 stood at the back of the lot, its windows empty, eyes staring at nothing. Roland arrived first, sweeping the space for any sign of surveillance or unwanted company. Old habit from his army days: never enter a space without knowing all the exits. Stanley Kemp arrived at 11:58, his BMW looking out of place against the industrial decay. He'd aged well, better than Roland, probably, but there were new lines around his eyes that spoke of stress. He climbed out of the car, face wary. "You want to tell me what this is about?" Stanley called across the parking lot. "Your cryptic phone call gave me nightmares." Roland waited until Stanley was close enough to speak quietly. "How much did you lose when our partnership collapsed?" "You know how much. 300 grand. Nearly destroyed my marriage, my credit." Stanley stopped, studying Roland's face. "What's happened to you, man? You look like hell." "Everything I thought I knew was a lie." Roland pulled out his phone, showing Stanley the law enforcement photo of Jillian Wolfe. "My wife. Except that's not her real name. And she's been working with her actual husband to frame me for crimes I didn't commit. And 5 years ago, they sabotaged our partnership to make me vulnerable." Stanley's face went pale. "That's insane." "Why would?" "Because that's what they do. They've done it 4 times before. 2 men are in prison, 1 killed himself, and 1 disappeared." Roland's voice was flat, emotionless. "I'm supposed to be number 5. He showed Stanley everything. The detective's files he'd photographed when Collins wasn't looking, the evidence from Jillian's computer, the video of her and Clayton planning his murder. With each new piece of information, Stanley's expression shifted from disbelief to fury. "We need to call the police," Stanley said finally. "The police are involved. They want to catch them, build a case. But cases can be beaten, Stanley. You know how the system works. Expensive lawyers, procedural errors, hung juries. These people have been doing this for years. So what are you suggesting?" Roland met his old friend's eyes. "I'm suggesting we make sure they can't do this to anyone else. Ever." Stanley swallowed hard. "Roland, that sounds like—" "I'm not talking about killing them," Roland interrupted. "I'm talking about destroying them the way they destroy others. Taking everything they have, everyone they work with, and making sure the world knows exactly what they are." "That's still illegal?" "Probably. Risky?" "Definitely." Roland's jaw tightened. "But I'm done playing by rules they don't follow. These people try to frame me, poison me, and steal everything I've built. They destroyed 4 other men, and we're about to make it 5. Someone needs to stop them, and the law moves too slow." Stanley was quiet for a long moment, then surprised Roland with a bitter laugh. "You know what I've been doing for the past 5 years? Trying to rebuild everything I lost when our partnership failed. Working 18-hour days, taking on projects I hated, just to get back to zero." He looked at Roland. "If they caused that deliberately, if they destroyed me just to get to you, then yeah, I'm in. What do you need?" "First, I need to know who else they've targeted." The detective gave me names, victims who are in prison or dead. But there might be others who got away or who they're currently working on. I need you to help me track them down. I still have contacts in the business world. I can make inquiries, see if anyone else has experienced similar patterns of sabotage and fraud. Second, I need resources. Money, equipment, people we can trust. The detective thinks I'm wearing a wire right now. Thinks I'm going home to play good husband while they build their case. But I need to move faster than they can." Stanley nodded slowly. "I've got about 100 grand liquid. It's my emergency fund, but if you need it, I need you to hold on to it. We might need clean money the police can't trace." Roland pulled out a flash drive. "This has copies of everything I found on Jillian's computer. Hidden files, communications with her co-conspirators. There's enough here to identify everyone in their network. What are you going to do with it?" "I'm going to rip their operation apart from the inside. Expose them to every person they've ever conned, every authority they've evaded. And then I'm going to make sure they experience exactly what they put their victims through." Roland's voice was cold. "They want to erase people? I'm going to erase them." Stanley took the flash drive, turning it over in his hands. "This is crazy. This could destroy us both. They already tried to destroy me. I'm just finishing what they started. Except I'm redirecting the blast." A sound made them both turn. Another car had entered the lot, a nondescript sedan. Roland tensed, but relaxed slightly when he recognized Detective Collins climbing out, face set in hard lines. "Damn it," Roland muttered. "The wire. I turned it off, but they must have been tracking my location." Collins approached, and his expression made it clear he wasn't happy. "Mr. Sweeney, I thought we agreed you'd wear the wire at all times. I thought we agreed you'd follow the plan." "Plans change, Detective. Not without consulting law enforcement. They don't." Collins glanced at Stanley. "Who's this?" "Stanley Kemp. Old friend. He's got a right to know. Jillian and Clayton sabotaged our business partnership 5 years ago as part of their setup." Collins's jaw tightened. "You can't be running your own investigation. You'll compromise everything we've built." "What you've built?" Roland's voice rose for the first time. "Detective, with all due respect, your investigation has been running for months, and you still don't have enough to arrest them. Meanwhile, they're planning to kill me tomorrow. So excuse me if I'm not confident in the justice system right now. We have evidence. That might stick or might not. I've done my homework, Detective. I know about the other victims. 2 in prison who couldn't prove their innocence. How is your careful, by-the-book investigation going to help them? Even if you arrest Jillian and Clayton today, those men are still behind bars." Collins was silent for a moment. "What are you planning, Sweeney? To do what the law can't, or won't. To make sure every victim gets justice, and to make sure Jillian, Clayton, and their whole network can never do this again. If you break the law, I can't protect you. I'm not asking you to." Roland held Collins's gaze. "But I am asking you to give me 48 hours. 2 days before you move on them. That's all I need. And if I say no, then I'll do it anyway, and you'll have compromised your investigation for nothing. But if you give me this time, I'll get you something better than a conviction. I'll get you the entire network, names, evidence, everything, including proof that will free the men who are in prison right now." Collins studied him, and Roland could see the war playing out behind the detective's eyes. The law versus pragmatism. Justice versus results. 48 hours, Collins said finally. "But if innocent people get hurt, the only people who get hurt will be the ones who deserve it." Roland turned to Stanley. "We've got work to do." As Collins drove away, Stanley let out a long breath. "You just blackmailed a police detective." "I gave him a choice. He made the smart one." Roland pulled out his phone, checking the time. "Jillian thinks I'm at the hardware store. I've got maybe 2 more hours before she gets suspicious. Here's what we're going to do." For the next hour, Roland laid out his plan. It was intricate, ruthless, and completely illegal. But as he spoke, Stanley's expression shifted from concern to understanding to something that looked almost like respect. "They wanted to destroy you," Stanley said when Roland finished. "Instead, you're going to destroy everything they've built." "Not everything," Roland corrected. "I'm going to make them destroy it themselves. I'm going to make them tear each other apart, expose each other, and when I'm done, there won't be anything left of them but ashes." "And what happens to you after?" Roland thought of the house he'd shared with a woman who'd planned his murder. The life he'd built that had been built on lies. "I don't know, but at least I'll be free." Chapter 5. The Web Unravels. Monday morning, Roland kissed Jillian goodbye like he had 1,000 times before. She smiled, that perfect, practiced smile, and told him to have a good day. He drove to the construction site where his crew was framing a new office building, but his mind was on the chess pieces he'd set in motion overnight. Stanley had come through. By dawn, he'd identified 3 more of Jillian and Clayton's victims, men who'd been too ashamed or frightened to report what had happened. One ran a restaurant in Ohio, another taught high school in Nevada. The third had moved to Alaska to escape the life they'd ruined. Stanley had contacted each of them with a simple message. "We know what happened to you, and we're going to make it right." The first response came at 9:47 a.m., forwarded from Stanley's phone to Roland's. The restaurant owner, a man named Garrett Morris, had written, "How? They have evidence that makes me look guilty. I've lost everything. My business, my family, my reputation. What can you possibly do?" Roland's reply was simple. "Trust me, and be ready to testify when the time comes." At lunch, Roland drove to a storage unit facility on the south side of town. Unit 247 had been rented under a fake name, paid for in cash. Inside was everything he'd taken from the house that morning while Jillian showered. Her laptop, hidden files, burner phones, a safe deposit box key he'd found behind a false panel in her closet. He'd also stopped at the bank and emptied their joint account, all $47,000. Jillian would notice, but by then, it wouldn't matter. His phone rang. Detective Collins. I hope you know what you're doing, Sweeney. You're tracking me, aren't you? I'm keeping an eye on someone who's about to do something spectacularly stupid. Yes. Collins's voice was tight. Jillian called the police an hour ago. Said you've been acting strange. That money's missing from your account. She's building her narrative. Let her. How long before you have to respond? I can stall for maybe 6 hours. After that, I'll have to bring you in for questioning. And once that happens, all bets are off. 6 hours is plenty. Roland checked his watch. 1:15 p.m. Is she still at the house? No. She's at a coffee shop on Main Street. Meeting someone. We can't get close enough to ID them without blowing our cover. It's Clayton. She's coordinating with him. Roland had expected this. Do you have eyes on Rosemary Proctor? She called in sick to work. We lost her around noon. That was less expected. Roland's mind raced, adjusting the plan. If all three conspirators were coordinating, they were either accelerating their timeline or preparing their escape. Either way, he needed to move faster. Detective, I need you to do something off the record. I'm already doing plenty off the record. The two victims in prison, the ones Jillian and Clayton framed. I need you to tell them that in the next 24 hours, they're going to get exoneration. New evidence will come to light. But I need them to hold on just a little longer. Collins was quiet for a long moment. You're really going to clear them? I'm going to clear everyone they've destroyed. But I need those men to stay strong. Can you do that? I'll make some calls. Collins paused. Sweeney, whatever you're planning, is probably illegal, definitely risky, and absolutely necessary. I know. 6 hours, detective. Then you can do your job. Roland ended the call and pulled out another phone, a burner he'd bought that morning. He dialed a number Stanley had provided. Rodolfo Moreno, one of the unreported victims, the one who disappeared to Alaska. Who is this? The voice was wary, accent thick. Mr. Moreno, my name is Roland Sweeney. I'm another victim of Jillian and Clayton Wolfe. I need to know, do you still have any evidence from what they did to you? Evidence. They made sure all the evidence pointed to me being the criminal. I had to run. I'm not talking about their evidence. I'm talking about anything you kept. Photos, documents, recordings. Anything that proves who you were before they destroyed you. A long pause. I have photos of me and the woman I knew as Mary Huff. Before I knew she was Jillian. Before everything fell apart. Roland's pulse quickened. Mary Huff, another alias. Mr. Moreno, I need you to send me everything you have. Because I'm about to prove to the world that you're innocent, and they're the monsters. How? I've been hiding for 3 years. Because I have something you didn't. I have time to prepare, resources, and I'm not running. Roland's voice hardened. I'm hunting. And when I'm done, everyone will know the truth. But I need your help. Will you trust me? Another pause. Then, send me an email address. I'll send everything. The pieces were falling into place. Roland's phone buzzed with a text from Stanley. Found the money trail. Offshore accounts in the Caymans, routed through shell companies. I can trace it, but it'll take time. Roland replied, you have 3 hours. At 2:30 p.m., Roland received an email from a name he didn't recognize. Rosemary Proctor. The subject line read, we need to talk. He opened it, every muscle tense. Mr. Sweeney, I know what Jillian and Clayton are planning. I know they're going to kill you and frame you for everything. I can help you, but only if you meet me. Alone. Today. 4 p.m. Old Industrial Park, Building 7. It was a trap, obviously, but it was also an opportunity. Roland forwarded the email to Stanley with instructions. If you don't hear from me by 4:30, call Collins and tell him everything. Then he texted Collins. Rosemary wants to meet. I'm going. Collins's response was immediate. Absolutely not. That's a setup. I know. But she's the weak link. If I can turn her, I can get everything we need. I can't protect you if you walk into an ambush. I don't need protection. I need 40 more minutes of freedom. Give me that. Roland drove to the industrial park, arriving at 3:45 p.m. Building 7 was more isolated than where he'd met Stanley. No nearby businesses, no security cameras. Perfect for someone who wanted privacy. Or violence. He parked and checked the weapon he'd retrieved from his safe that morning. A Glock 19 he'd carried in the army and kept for home defense. He'd never thought he'd need it for something like this. But then again, He'd never thought his wife would try to murder him. At precisely 4 p.m., a car pulled up. Rosemary Proctor emerged, 40-ish, plain-faced, the kind of person who disappeared in a crowd. She approached slowly, hands visible. "Mr. Sweeney. Miss Proctor. You wanted to talk. I want out." Her voice shook slightly. "I never wanted anyone to die. The fraud, the identity theft, I could rationalize that. But when Clayton bought the fentanyl, when Jillian started talking about making it look like you overdosed," she wrapped her arms around herself. "I'm not a murderer, but you are a co-conspirator. Yes, and I'll testify. I'll give you everything. All the victims, all the evidence, all the money trails. But I need witness protection. I need guarantees." Roland studied her. She was terrified, genuine. But she was also the person who'd flagged him as a target, who'd helped destroy 4 other men's lives. "Why should I trust you?" "Because Clayton and Jillian are planning to kill me too." Rosemary's voice broke. "I know too much. After they frame you and disappear, I'm the loose end. They're meeting me tonight to split the profits, but I found the same fentanyl in Clayton's car. They're going to poison me, too." That tracked. Professional criminals didn't leave witnesses. "What time is the meeting?" 8 p.m. At their real house, not the one you know. They have a place across town where they plan everything. Roland pulled out his phone. "Give me the address. Give me everything. And then I'll decide if you live through this." Rosemary's eyes widened, but she was smart enough to know she had no leverage. For the next 20 minutes, she laid it all out. The complete network, the methods, the victims they were currently grooming. She gave Roland passwords to encrypted drives, the location of evidence caches, even the name of the lawyer who helped them structure their shell companies. When she finished, Roland made a decision. "Call Detective Collins. Tell him everything you just told me. Become a witness for the state, and maybe you'll get a deal. And if I don't, then at 8 p.m. tonight, you'll walk into that house and drink whatever they offer you, and you'll die wondering if I could have saved you." Roland's voice was ice. "Your choice, Miss Proctor." She pulled out her phone with shaking hands and dialed. Roland left her there, making the call that would crack the case wide open. But he wasn't relying on her testimony alone. He had something better now. The address of the house where Jillian and Clayton felt safe. The place where they'd planned everything. The place where, in 4 hours, they'd gather to commit another murder and walk straight into the trap Roland had prepared. He texted Stanley, "I need you to do something for me. Something that might get you arrested." Stanley's reply came instantly. "Tell me." Chapter 6. The Trap Springs. At 6:30 p.m., Roland sat in his truck 3 blocks from the address Rosemary had provided. The house was a modest ranch in a quiet suburban neighborhood, the kind of place where no one looked twice at their neighbors. Perfect camouflage for people like Jillian and Clayton. His phone buzzed. "Stanley." "It's done," his friend said. "Every victim, every piece of evidence, every transaction, it's all been sent to a lawyer I trust. If anything happens to either of us, it goes public. To the media, to the FBI, to every law enforcement agency in the country." "Good. What about the money?" "I traced $47 million through their network. That's from all their victims combined over 7 years. Most of it's still accessible if you know where to look. I've documented everything." Roland let out a breath. 47 million. Lives destroyed for money. Send the documentation to Collins. Let him start the asset forfeiture process. Already done. He's got a warrant prepared. He's just waiting for your signal. He'll get it soon. Roland checked the clock on his dashboard. 6:42 p.m. "Stanley, if this goes wrong." "It won't. You've been 10 steps ahead of them this whole time. If it does, make sure the truth gets out. Make sure everyone knows what they are." "I will. But Roland, come back. Don't let revenge turn you into something you're not." Roland ended the call without answering. He knew what Stanley was worried about, that Roland would cross a line he couldn't uncross, that the need for vengeance would consume him. But Stanley didn't understand. This wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about justice. Real justice, not the sanitized, procedural version that let monsters slip through cracks. At 7:45 p.m., Jillian's car pulled into the driveway. Roland watched through binoculars as she emerged, glancing around before entering the house. 5 minutes later, a black SUV arrived, Clayton Wolfe. He was tall, confident, the kind of man who'd perfected the art of seeming trustworthy. He carried a bag that probably contained the fentanyl meant for Rosemary. Roland waited. At 7:58 p.m., his phone rang. Rosemary. They're expecting me in 2 minutes. Are you sure about this? I'm sure. We're the wire Collins gave you. Get them talking. Get them to admit everything. And if they poison me anyway, they won't get the chance. Roland had made sure of that. He'd called Detective Collins an hour ago, told him everything, given him the address. Police units were staged 3 blocks away, waiting for Roland's signal. Just get the confession. At 8 p.m., Rosemary's car appeared. She parked, sat for a moment gathering courage, then walked to the door. It opened, Jillian, smiling warmly, playing the friend. They disappeared inside. Roland gave it 5 minutes, then moved. He circled to the back of the house, where he'd scouted earlier. The basement window was unlocked. Rosemary had left it that way per his instructions. He slipped inside, moving through the darkness with muscle memory from a dozen night operations in the Army. Voices drifted down from upstairs. He found the basement door, opened it a crack. Really didn't want to involve you in the unpleasant part, Clayton was saying. But we need to make sure all the loose ends are tied up. I understand. Rosemary's voice wavered convincingly. Roland Sweeney, you're sure he won't be a problem? He'll be dead by tomorrow morning, Jillian said casually, and hearing her say it, hearing the woman he'd loved discuss his murder like it was a grocery list, sent ice through Roland's veins. The police will find him, overdosed on fentanyl, with all the evidence of fraud pointing to him. Another tragic story of a criminal who couldn't live with his guilt. What about the life insurance? Rosemary asked. $500,000, Clayton said, plus the money we've already moved from his accounts. With Roland and the others we've set up, we'll have enough to retire. Somewhere without extradition. The others? Rosemary prompted, and Roland silently thanked her for pushing. They needed names, details. The 2 idiots in prison did us a favor, Jillian laughed. They can't expose us because they're trying to prove their own innocence. And Marcus, the one who disappeared in Oregon? Let's just say he won't be a problem anymore. Roland's hand tightened on the door frame. Marcus, another victim Collins had mentioned. One who disappeared. Won't be a problem. Implied he was dead, not just in hiding. And the teacher in Nevada? Clayton added. He killed himself last year. Couldn't handle the shame. That's terrible, Rosemary said, and Roland heard the genuine horror in her voice. Maybe she really hadn't known about Marcus. Or maybe she was a better actor than he'd thought. It's survival, Jillian corrected. We take from people who won't be missed. Losers, loners, people whose lives are already falling apart. We just give them a push. Something in Roland broke. These weren't criminals, they were predators. And they'd called him a loser, someone who wouldn't be missed. He pulled out his phone and sent a single text to Collins. Now. Then he stepped through the basement door and climbed the stairs. The only problem, he said as he emerged into the living room, is that I'm not falling apart. And I'm not going anywhere. The scene froze. Jillian's face went white. Clayton's hand moved toward his waistband, toward a gun, Roland realized. Rosemary stumbled backward, genuine shock on her face. Roland, Jillian breathed. What are you? Did you really think I wouldn't find out? Roland's voice was calm, steady, the voice of a man completely in control. 3 years, Jillian. You spent 3 years in my bed, planning my death. Did you ever feel anything real? Or was it all just a performance? This is insane, Clayton said, hand still moving toward his weapon. You need to leave. Now. I'm not going anywhere. But you are. Roland gestured around the room. Every word you've said for the past 15 minutes has been recorded. Rosemary's wearing a wire. And right now, Detective Collins is listening to every word, waiting just outside with a warrant for your arrest. Jillian's mask cracked, fury blazing through. You son of a... The front door burst open. Police officers flooded in, guns drawn. Hands. Let me see your hands. Clayton's hand came away from his waistband. No weapon, just a phone. He raised his hands, face twisted with rage. Jillian stood frozen, and Roland saw the calculation in her eyes, the desperate search for an exit that didn't exist. Detective Collins entered last, holstering his weapon. Clayton Wolfe, Jillian Wolfe, you're under arrest for conspiracy to commit fraud, identity theft, attempted murder, and about 15 other charges I'm going to enjoy listing. As the officers moved in with handcuffs, Jillian's eyes locked on Roland. You'll never prove it all. We have lawyers. We have. You have nothing, Roland interrupted. Every account, every document, every victim's testimony, it's all documented. including evidence that will free the men you put in prison, including proof that you murdered Marcus in Oregon. Jillian's face went slack. That's right, Roland continued. We know about him too. And when they search your properties, they're going to find evidence. Because people like you always keep trophies, always make mistakes. You just got sloppy. As they dragged Clayton toward the door, he snarled at Roland. You think you've won? You think this is over? No, Roland said quietly. It's just beginning. Because every victim you've destroyed is going to testify. Every person you've hurt is going to stand up and tell the world what you are. And then you're going to spend the rest of your lives in prison, where everyone will know exactly what you did. Jillian was the last to be let out. At the door, she turned back. I did love you, you know. In my way. Roland held her gaze. No, you didn't. Because people who love don't destroy. They build. He paused. I built a life with you. You tried to tear it down. But I'm still standing, and you're the one in handcuffs. Remember that when you're in your cell. Her face crumbled, and they took her away. The house fell silent except for Rosemary, who stood shaking in the corner. Collins approached her. Ms. Proctor, you'll need to come to the station. Your cooperation will be noted, but there are still charges. I know, she whispered. I know. After she was gone, Collins turned to Roland. You took a hell of a risk coming in here. I needed to see it. Needed to hear them say it. Roland looked around the house. This place where his destruction had been planned. All those victims. Marcus, the teacher who killed himself. They talked about them like they were nothing. We'll investigate Marcus's disappearance. If they killed him, we'll prove it. Collins put a hand on Roland's shoulder. You did good, Sweeney. Unorthodox as hell, but good. Those people in prison, we can free them now. And we've got enough evidence to put the wolves away for life. What about the money? Asset forfeiture will recover most of it. It'll go back to the victims. Collins studied Roland's face. Are you okay? Roland thought about that question. Was he okay? His marriage was a lie. His life for the past 3 years had been a fabrication. He'd come within hours of being murdered, framed for crimes he didn't commit. But he was alive. The truth was out. And justice, real justice, was happening. I'm better than they wanted me to be, he said finally. Collins nodded. Come on. We've got paperwork, statements. This is going to be a long night. As they walked out of the house, Roland took one last look back. The place where Jillian and Clayton had felt safe, had planned their crimes, had laughed about their victims. Now it was just evidence in a case that would destroy them. Roland turned away and didn't look back again. Chapter 7. The Foundation Rebuilt. The courthouse steps were cold in the November morning. Roland stood with Stanley, both men in suits, watching as media vans crowded the street. Inside, the preliminary hearing was about to begin, the first step in a trial that would expose everything Jillian and Clayton Wolfe had done. You ready for this? Stanley asked. For what? Watching the people who tried to destroy me get what they deserve. Roland's voice was steady. Yeah, I'm ready. Detective Collins emerged from the courthouse, descending the steps to meet them. The prosecutor wants to talk to you before the hearing. They've got new evidence. What kind of evidence? The kind that changes everything. Inside a private conference room, Assistant District Attorney Merle McCarty spread photographs across the table. She was sharp-eyed, early 40s, with the focused intensity of someone who'd built a career on complicated cases. Mr. Sweeney, we've been excavating the property where Jillian and Clayton lived, their real house. We found something. She pushed a photo forward. Remains. Human remains. Roland's stomach dropped. Marcus. We believe so. DNA testing is ongoing, but the timeline matches. He disappeared 3 years ago, last seen meeting a woman matching Jillian's description. McCarty's expression was grim. But that's not all. We found evidence of at least 2 other burial sites on the property. 2 others. Stanley's voice cracked. You mean they've killed before? We're working on identifying the remains. But yes, it appears Jillian and Clayton's operation was more extensive and more lethal than we initially believed. McCarty looked at Roland. I need you to understand what this means. This isn't just fraud and identity theft anymore. This is a death penalty case. Roland absorbed that. The death penalty. Part of him felt satisfaction, justice for the people they'd murdered. But another part felt hollow. How many lives had been destroyed? How many people had died while these monsters walked free? What do you need from me? He asked. Your testimony is crucial. But more than that, I need you to help us understand their psychology. You lived with Jillian for 3 years. You saw sides of her others didn't. That insight could be the difference between conviction and acquittal. Over the next hour, Roland walked them through everything. The small moments he'd dismissed at the time, Jillian's lack of emotional reaction when they'd watched crime documentaries, her fascination with true crime podcasts, the way she'd seemed to study people like specimens. The pattern of isolation she'd woven around him, cutting him off from friends and family. The subtle financial control. She was patient, Roland said. That's what made her so effective. She didn't rush. She built trust over years, so when the betrayal came, it was absolute. McCarty took notes. The defense will argue that she was coerced by Clayton, that she was a victim herself. They'll paint her as a battered woman who had no choice. She wasn't a victim. Roland's voice hardened. I saw the videos, read the messages. She was an equal partner. She enjoyed it. Can you prove that in court? I can show who she really is. And I can make sure the jury sees it too. The hearing began at 10 a.m. The courtroom was packed. Media, victims' families, law enforcement. Roland sat in the front row, Stanley beside him, as Jillian and Clayton were brought in. They wore orange jumpsuits, hands cuffed, but Jillian still managed to look composed. Her eyes found Roland's across the courtroom, and for a moment, he saw a flash of the woman he'd thought he'd married. Then her expression hardened into something cold and calculating. The charges were read: multiple counts of fraud, identity theft, conspiracy, attempted murder. And now, 3 counts of first-degree murder. Jillian's lawyer, an expensive-looking man in a designer suit, stood immediately. Your Honor, my client pleads not guilty to all charges. Furthermore, we request bail consideration. Bail? The judge, a stern woman named Tammy Garrett, raised an eyebrow. Counselor, your client is accused of murdering 3 people and attempting to murder a 4th. She's a clear flight risk. My client has no prior record, Your Honor. She has strong ties to the community. Under multiple false identities, the prosecutor interjected. Your Honor, the defendant has used at least 7 different names in the past decade. She has access to resources we're still uncovering, and she has every motivation to flee. We're requesting remand without bail. Judge Garrett didn't hesitate. Remand without bail for both defendants. Next hearing in 30 days. As the guards led them away, Clayton turned and looked directly at Roland. This isn't over, he mouthed. Roland met his gaze without flinching. Yes, it is. Outside the courthouse, media swarmed. Roland had prepared a statement with McCarty, but as he stood at the microphone, the prepared words felt inadequate. He spoke from the heart instead. My name is Roland Sweeney. 3 weeks ago, I discovered that the woman I married, the woman I loved, was a stranger. She and her husband, her real husband, had spent years destroying lives, stealing identities, and murdering anyone who got in their way. I was supposed to be their next victim. He paused, gathering his thoughts. But I'm standing here today because I refuse to be a victim. I fought back. And I want everyone who's been hurt by people like Jillian and Clayton Wolfe to know, you're not alone. You're not to blame. And there is justice. Cameras flashed. Questions erupted. Roland ignored them all and walked away, Stanley at his side. That was good, Stanley said quietly. You're giving people hope. I'm giving them the truth. That's all I can do. Over the next weeks, Roland watched as the case built. The 2 men wrongfully imprisoned, Kenneth Burns and Lewis Hendricks, were released, their convictions overturned based on the evidence Roland had uncovered. They emerged from prison to media attention, lawyers already filing wrongful conviction suits. Roland met with them privately, in a quiet office away from cameras. I don't know how to thank you, Kenneth said. His face was haggard, aged beyond his years by 3 years of wrongful imprisonment. I'd given up hope. You don't need to thank me, Roland replied. I just did what anyone would do. No, Lewis said quietly. Most people wouldn't have risked what you did. Most people would have let the system handle it, and we'd still be in prison. The victims who'd survived, Garrett Morris, Rodolfo Moreno, and others, began to come forward. Their stories were eerily similar. Sudden financial disaster, evidence that appeared to incriminate them, the systematic destruction of their lives. Some had lost families, careers, everything they'd built. Stanley worked with a team of financial investigators to trace and recover the stolen money. $47 million had been taken, but through careful work, they recovered $39 million. It would be distributed to the victims, their lives at least partially rebuilt. Roland found himself becoming something he'd never expected, an advocate. Victims reached out to him, seeking advice, support, someone who understood. He started a foundation, funded partially by his recovered assets, to help people who'd been targeted by sophisticated fraud schemes. But through it all, one question haunted him: the third burial at Jillian and Clayton's property. 2 bodies had been identified, Marcus and a woman named Hannah Woodward, another victim from 5 years ago. But the third remained unidentified, a Jane Doe who'd been buried for at least 7 years. She was probably their first, Detective Collins said during one of their regular meetings. Before they perfected their system, someone they killed and buried, and learned from their mistakes. Does anyone deserve to be forgotten like that? Roland asked. Buried without even a name. We're working on it. DNA databases, missing persons reports. We'll find out who she was. The trial date was set, January 15th. Roland spent the holidays in a strange liminal space, not quite victim, not quite survivor, something in between. He'd moved out of the house he'd shared with Jillian, found a small apartment across town. The place was sparse, impersonal, but it was his. Real. Honest. On New Year's Eve, Stanley stopped by with pizza and beer. To new beginnings, Stanley toasted. Roland clinked his bottle against Stanley's. To truth. You know, Stanley said after a while, I've been thinking about what you said. About the system moving too slow. About how you had to take matters into your own hands. Second thoughts about helping me? No. Just wondering if you regret it. Going outside the law. Roland considered that. He'd broken into Jillian's computer, stolen evidence, coordinated with Stanley to investigate illegally, confronted dangerous criminals without backup. Any of it could have gotten him killed. All of it could have compromised the case. I regret that I had to, he said finally. I regret that the system didn't work fast enough to save Marcus or Hannah or that unknown woman. But do I regret fighting back? No, never. His phone rang. Collins. Roland, we got an ID on the third body. The detective's voice was strained. You need to sit down for this. Why? Who was she? Her name was Marie Wolfe. She was Clayton's first wife. She disappeared 7 years ago, shortly before Clayton met Jillian in prison. Collins paused. Roland, Jillian didn't meet Clayton by chance. She knew about Marie's disappearance. There's evidence she helped him cover it up, possibly in exchange for becoming his partner. The pieces clicked into place. Jillian hadn't been corrupted by Clayton. She'd sought him out. She'd found a killer and decided to join him. There's more, Collins continued. Marie's family has been looking for her for 7 years. They filed missing person reports, hired investigators, never gave up. They're coming to the trial. They want to see justice. Roland thought of Marie's family, 7 years of not knowing, of hoping, of wondering. They'll get it, he said. I'll make sure of it. After the call ended, Stanley asked, What are you thinking? I'm thinking that when I testify, I'm not just speaking for myself anymore. I'm speaking for Marcus, for Hannah, for Marie, for every person they destroyed. Roland met his friend's eyes. And I'm going to make sure the world knows exactly what they are. Chapter 8. The Reckoning. The trial began on a Monday morning with snow falling outside. Roland sat in the witness waiting room, reviewing his testimony one final time. Through the window, he could see protesters, both for and against Jillian. Some held signs reading "Justice for the Victims." Others claimed she was being railroaded, that she was a victim of Clayton's manipulation. Assistant District Attorney McCarty entered, her expression focused. You're up after lunch. Are you ready? I've been ready since the moment I found out the truth. The defense is going to try to rattle you. They'll suggest you're motivated by revenge, that your testimony is unreliable because of your emotional involvement. She met his eyes. Don't let them bait you. Stick to the facts. The morning session was brutal. The prosecutor presented the evidence, financial records, communications, the videos Roland had found on Jillian's computer. Marie Wolfe's family sat in the front row, tears streaming as they saw photos of her remains, heard how she'd been murdered and buried in the backyard. During the lunch break, Roland sat alone in the corridor. A man approached, late 50s, face worn with grief. He wore a button with Marie's photo on it. Mr. Sweeney? I'm Richard Platt. Marie Wolfe was my daughter. Roland stood, throat tight. Mr. Platt, I'm sorry. Don't apologize. You helped find her. After 7 years of not knowing. His voice broke. My wife and I, we can finally lay our daughter to rest. Because of you. I wish I could have done more. You did more than anyone else. You stopped them. Richard Platt gripped Roland's hand. When you testify today, know that you're not just speaking for yourself. You're speaking for Marie too. And we're grateful. When Roland took the stand at 2 p.m., the courtroom was silent. Jillian sat at the defense table, her expression carefully neutral. Clayton sat separately, his lawyer having negotiated a deal to testify against Jillian in exchange for life without parole instead of the death penalty. McCarty began with the basics: his background, his marriage to Jillian, the seemingly normal life they'd built. Mr. Sweeney, when did you first suspect something was wrong? When the police officer showed me her real identity. Before that, I had no idea. She was careful, perfect even. Every reaction, every emotion, every word was calculated. Can you describe your relationship with the defendant? Roland looked at Jillian. She met his gaze, and for a moment, he saw something flicker in her expression. Fear? Regret? He couldn't tell. For 3 years, I thought I knew her. I thought we had something real. But it was all a performance. She studied me, learned my weaknesses, and used them against me. She isolated me from friends and family. She had me trust her with everything. And all the while, she was planning my death. How did that make you feel? Objection. Jillian's lawyer stood. Relevance. Your Honor, the defendant's psychological manipulation is central to understanding her methods, McCarty argued. I'll allow it. Answer the question, Mr. Sweeney. Roland took a breath. It made me feel like I'd never existed. Like everything I was, everything I'd built, meant nothing. That's what she does. She erases people. She takes their lives, their identities, their futures, and she treats it like a business transaction. The questioning continued for hours. McCarty walked him through every detail: the evidence he'd found, the confrontation at the safe house, the confession he'd recorded. The defense attorney tried to poke holes, suggesting Roland had planted evidence, that his testimony was unreliable. Mr. Sweeney, isn't it true that you broke into my client's computer illegally? Yes. And that you stole documents from her possession? Yes. So you're admitting to multiple crimes? Roland leaned forward. I'm admitting that I did what was necessary to stop a serial killer. Your client murdered at least 3 people and was planning to murder me. I'd break 100 laws to stop someone like that. Your Honor. I'll rephrase, Roland continued. Everything I did to save lives. Everything your client did was to destroy them. Let the jury decide which is worse. The defense attorney tried to recover, but the damage was done. The jury had seen Roland's conviction, his certainty. When Clayton took the stand the next day, Roland watched from the gallery. The man who'd been so confident at the safe house now looked diminished, defeated. He'd taken a plea deal, but his testimony against Jillian was devastating. She found me, Clayton said. After Marie. I'd made it look like Marie left me, but Jillian figured it out. She approached me in prison and said we could be partners. That we could perfect what I'd started. So the idea for the fraud scheme was whose? McCarty asked. Jillian's. All of it. She planned everything. The marks, the methods, the exit strategies. I helped execute it, but it was her vision. And the murders? Clayton's face twisted. Marie was mine. I panicked when she discovered some financial irregularities. But Marcus and Hannah, those were Jillian's. She said they were liabilities, that we had to eliminate them. I helped bury them, but she pulled the trigger. Jillian's lawyer tried to discredit him, but Clayton had evidence, recordings, messages, proof that Jillian had been the mastermind. The carefully constructed defense of Jillian as a manipulated victim crumbled. On the 3rd day, Jillian herself took the stand. It was a desperate move, but her lawyer had no choice. She needed to humanize herself, to make the jury see her as something other than a monster. She spoke about her childhood, an abusive father, foster homes. She cried, actual tears, talking about meeting Clayton, about being drawn into his schemes. I was afraid, she said, voice breaking. He threatened me. He said if I didn't help him, I'd end up like Marie. It was a compelling performance. Some jurors looked sympathetic. Roland felt his stomach turn. Then McCarty stood for cross-examination. Ms. Wolfe, you testified that you were afraid of Clayton. Is that correct? Yes. Yet in the videos we've shown the jury, videos you recorded yourself, you're laughing about your victims. You're celebrating their downfall. Does that seem like the behavior of someone who's afraid? Jillian's composure wavered. I had to act like I was enjoying it. To keep him happy. Really? Let's look at this message you sent to Rosemary Proctor. McCarty displayed a text on the screen. You wrote, I love watching them break. It's like being a god, deciding who survives and who doesn't. Does that sound like someone acting? I was playing a role. Or perhaps this message to Clayton. Marcus was weak. He deserved what he got. Let's find someone stronger next time. Make it more interesting. Were you playing a role then too? Jillian's mask finally cracked. You don't understand. I understand perfectly, Ms. Wolfe. You enjoyed it. You enjoyed destroying lives, enjoyed the power, enjoyed the game. And when you got bored, you killed them. McCarty moved closer. Mr. Sweeney was just another game to you, wasn't he? Another victim to a race. No. Jillian's eyes found Roland in the gallery. I did care about him. In my way. In your way. McCarty's voice dripped with contempt. You planned his murder. You bought the drugs that would kill him. You were going to watch him die and then collect his life insurance. Is that your way of caring? Jillian said nothing. Let me ask you something else. Marie Wolfe. Did you help Clayton kill her? No. That was before. Before you decided to become partners with a murderer? Before you helped him cover up her death? Before you participated in at least 2 more murders? McCarty pulled out a document. This is a letter you wrote to Clayton while he was in prison, before you met him in person. You wrote, I know what you did to your wife. I'm not judging. I'm impressed. We could do great things together. Does that sound like someone who was coerced? Jillian's lawyer objected, but it was too late. The jury had seen the truth. The mask had fallen, and beneath it was something cold and calculating and utterly without remorse. The prosecution rested their case. The defense tried to salvage it, but it was futile. The evidence was overwhelming, the testimony damning. On Friday afternoon, after closing arguments, the jury retired to deliberate. Roland waited with Stanley and Detective Collins in the hallway. How long do you think? Stanley asked. Could be hours, could be days, Collins replied. It took 3 hours. When the jury returned, the forewoman stood, her face set in grim lines. The judge asked for the verdict. In the case of the People versus Jillian Marie Wolfe, on the charge of first-degree murder of Marie Wolfe, we find the defendant guilty. The courtroom erupted. Roland felt Stanley grip his shoulder as the forewoman continued. On the charge of first-degree murder of Marcus Chun, guilty. On the charge of first-degree murder of Hannah Woodward, guilty. On all charges of fraud, identity theft, and conspiracy, guilty. Jillian sat frozen as her lawyer slumped. Clayton, watching from the side of the room, showed no expression. Judge Garrett banged her gavel for order. The defendants will be remanded into custody pending sentencing. This court is adjourned. As the guards led Jillian away, she turned one last time to look at Roland. He saw no tears, no regret, no humanity. Just a predator who'd finally been caged. Outside the courthouse, Marie Wolfe's family embraced each other, weeping with relief. Kenneth Burns and Lewis Hendricks, the wrongfully convicted men, stood with their lawyers, free men vindicated. Garrett Morris and Rodolfo Moreno, victims who'd survived, looked like weight had been lifted from their shoulders. McCarty approached Roland. The sentencing hearing is in 2 weeks. They're facing the death penalty. Do you want to make a victim impact statement? Yes, Roland said without hesitation. I have things to say. That night, alone in his apartment, Roland looked at the photo he still had of Jillian, the woman he'd thought was his wife. He should burn it, destroy it, erase her from his life the way she'd tried to erase him. Instead, he filed it away in a box with all the other evidence of that life. Not to remember her, but to remember what he'd survived, what he'd overcome. He'd been erased, and he'd rebuilt himself stronger. Chapter 9, The Last Word. The sentencing hearing took place 2 weeks later in a courtroom packed with victims, families, media, and the curious. Roland had spent those weeks preparing his statement, writing and rewriting, trying to capture everything he wanted to say. Judge Garrett called the court to order. Before I deliver sentencing, I'll hear victim impact statements. Mr. Sweeney, you may proceed. Roland stood, walked to the podium, and looked at Jillian. She stared back, expression unreadable. Your Honor, members of the court, Roland began, his voice steady. 3 months ago, I thought I knew who I was. I was a construction manager, a husband, a man with a normal life. Then I discovered it was all a lie. He paused, gathering his thoughts. Jillian Wolfe, if that's even her real name, didn't just steal from me. She didn't just plan to kill me. She tried to erase my entire existence. She wanted to make me disappear, to turn me into a statistic, another victim no one would remember. But I'm still here. And so is Kenneth Burns, and Lewis Hendricks, and Garrett Morris, and Rodolfo Moreno. We're still here because we refuse to be erased. Because we fought back. Roland's eyes moved to Marie Wolfe's family. But not everyone survived. Marie Wolfe, Marcus Chun, Hannah Woodward, they're gone. They can't speak for themselves. So I'm speaking for them. They deserved better. They deserved to live, to grow old, to be remembered for who they were, not how they died. He turned back to Jillian. I want you to know something. You thought you were superior, that you could manipulate and destroy people because they were weak. But you were wrong. The people you hurt weren't weak. They were trusting. They were kind. They were human. You're the weak one. You're so hollow inside that you had to consume others to feel anything at all. I don't forgive you. I'll never forgive you. But I don't hate you either, because that would give you power over me. Instead, I pity you. You'll spend the rest of your life in a cage, and even there, you'll be empty. Because there's nothing inside you but darkness. Roland took a breath. Your Honor, I'm not asking for the death penalty. I'm asking for something worse. Let her live. Let her spend decades in prison, watching the world move on without her, watching her victims rebuild their lives, knowing that she failed. That's the justice she deserves. He returned to his seat. Marie Wolfe's father spoke next, his voice breaking as he described 7 years of not knowing what had happened to his daughter. Kenneth Burns spoke about 3 years of wrongful imprisonment, about missing his children grow up, about the stigma that would follow him forever. One by one, the victims told their stories. When they finished, Judge Garrett looked at Jillian and Clayton. I've been a judge for 23 years. I've seen murderers, fraudsters, every kind of criminal. But rarely have I seen such calculated cruelty, such systematic destruction of human lives. She paused. The jury has recommended the death penalty. However, I agree with Mr. Sweeney. Death is too easy. Jillian Marie Wolfe, I sentence you to life in prison without the possibility of parole, to be served in maximum security. You will spend the rest of your natural life behind bars, with no hope of freedom, no possibility of redemption. Clayton Wolfe, per your plea agreement, I sentence you to life in prison without the possibility of parole. You will never walk free again. The gavel fell. It was over. As the guards led them away, Clayton walked without looking back. But Jillian stopped at the door, turning to look at Roland one last time. He met her gaze, and in that moment, something passed between them. Understanding, perhaps, or simply acknowledgement. Then she was gone. Outside, the November sun was surprisingly warm. Roland stood on the courthouse steps, surrounded by people whose lives had intersected with his in the most terrible way. What will you do now? Stanley asked. Roland thought about that. He had his freedom, his name cleared. The foundation he'd started was growing, helping other victims of fraud and identity theft. He had a purpose now, born from pain, but transformed into something meaningful. I'm going to live, he said simply. Really live. Not the performance I was living with Jillian, but something real. Something honest. You've earned it, Stanley said. Detective Collins approached, extending his hand. You did good, Sweeney. You could have let the system handle it, but you fought for justice. For everyone. Sometimes the system needs help, Roland replied. Just don't make a habit of it, Collins said with a small smile. As the crowd dispersed, Roland found himself face to face with Garrett Morris, the restaurant owner whose life had been destroyed years ago. I never thought I'd see this day, Garrett said. I thought I'd carry the shame of what happened to me forever. But you showed me that it wasn't my fault. That I wasn't alone. None of us were, Roland said. That's what she counted on. That we'd be isolated, ashamed, too broken to fight back. She was wrong. The last person to approach was Richard Platt, Marie's father. His eyes were red from crying, but there was peace in his expression now. Thank you, he said simply, for giving us answers, for giving us justice, for giving us our daughter back, even if only to bury her properly. Roland gripped the older man's hand. She didn't deserve what happened to her. None of them did. But they have justice now. Because of you. As the winter sun began to set, Roland stood alone on the courthouse steps. 3 months ago, he'd been pulled over for a broken taillight. 3 months ago, his life had shattered. 3 months ago, he'd discovered that everything he knew was a lie. But he hadn't broken. He'd bent, adapted, fought back. He'd refused to be erased. A text came through from Stanley. Drinks tonight? We're celebrating. Roland smiled. Yes, celebrating was appropriate. Not because of revenge, though seeing Jillian and Clayton behind bars brought a grim satisfaction, but because he'd survived. Because he'd helped others survive. Because he'd turned the worst moment of his life into something that meant something. He texted back, I'll be there. As he walked to his truck, the same truck where this had all begun, Roland thought about the future. He'd sell the house he'd shared with Jillian, cut all ties to that false life. The foundation would grow, helping more victims. He'd reconnect with old friends, rebuild relationships he'd let wither. He'd start dating again, eventually. But this time, he'd be smarter, more careful, more aware of red flags, of performances, of people who seemed too perfect. But he wouldn't let Jillian's betrayal make him cynical. He wouldn't let her darkness taint his ability to trust, to love, to build something real. Because that's what she'd wanted, to destroy him so completely that he could never be whole again. And he'd refused to give her that satisfaction. Roland climbed into his truck, the broken taillight finally fixed. He sat for a moment, hands on the wheel, breathing in the cold November air. Then he started the engine and drove away from the courthouse, from the trial, from the nightmare that had been his life with Jillian Wolfe. He drove toward the future, uncertain, yes, but his own, real, honest, free. The road stretched ahead, and Roland Sweeney drove on, a survivor who'd refused to be erased, a victim who'd become a victor, a man who'd faced the darkness and emerged into the light. Behind him, in a maximum security prison, Jillian would spend the rest of her life in a cage, watching the world move on without her. And every day, she'd remember the one victim who'd fought back, the one man she couldn't destroy, the one who'd won. Epilogue. 6 months later, Roland stood in front of a new building, the headquarters of the Survivors Foundation, funded by recovered assets from Jillian and Clayton's crimes. Kenneth Burns worked there now, helping other wrongfully convicted individuals. Lewis Hendricks ran the legal aid division. Garrett Morris managed outreach to fraud victims. They'd turned their pain into purpose, their trauma into transformation. Roland had sold his story to a production company, not for profit, but to raise awareness. The money would fund the foundation for years. He'd started dating someone new, a woman named Emily Fleming, a teacher who'd survived her own trauma and understood the scars that never quite healed. It was slow, careful, honest. Everything his relationship with Jillian hadn't been. One evening, Roland received a letter from the prison. It was from Jillian. He stared at it for a long time, then threw it away without opening it. Whatever she had to say didn't matter anymore. She was his past. The foundation, Emily, the lives they were rebuilding. That was his future. Roland Sweeney had been pulled over for a broken taillight and discovered his life was a lie. He'd been targeted for destruction by people who thought he was just another weak, forgettable victim. They'd been wrong. He was strong. He was smart. He was a survivor. And he'd won. This is where our story comes to an end. Share your thoughts in the comments section. Thanks for your time. If you enjoy this story, please subscribe to this channel. Click on the video you see on the screen, and I will see you there.